Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're doing well wherever you are in the world. Have you ever argued with someone who, even after realizing that you were right, still refused to accept the truth? Why does that happen? Stubbornness is not always a sign of strength. Sometimes, people who are stubborn are actually revealing their fears. It may stem from a deep sense of insecurity, or perhaps an old emotional wound has shaped them into the stubborn individuals they appear to be today. Why are some people willing to suffer losses themselves, yet still refuse to back down? I'm sure you've encountered people like this. Is stubbornness inherited through genetics? Are stubborn people simply born this way? Or is it the result of upbringing, environment, or life experiences? If you think stubborn people are merely trying to make others miserable, the truth may be quite different. Sometimes the greatest enemy of a person's success is neither ignorance nor lack of knowledge. Many stubborn individuals are highly intelligent. They have received excellent educations and possess impressive academic qualifications. Yet their stubbornness ultimately becomes their greatest obstacle. If you're interested in this topic, stay with me throughout this video. I'll simplify the scientific concepts and present the key findings in a clear and concise way. First, let's define what stubbornness actually means. Simply put, stubbornness is when someone insists on holding on to a decision, an opinion, or a behavior, even after clear evidence shows that it is incorrect or harmful, yet they continue to cling to it. However, there is an important difference between stubbornness and determination. Many people confuse the two, but this distinction is essential. Ladies and gentlemen, determination means standing firmly for your rights based on logic and reason. It means defending a justified position with confidence and conviction. That is determination, not stubbornness. Stubbornness, on the other hand, is refusing to accept reality even when logic clearly demonstrates the truth. Stubborn people tend to share several characteristics that often make life difficult for those around them. The first, and perhaps most obvious trait, is that they find it extremely difficult to admit their mistakes. Even if you present overwhelming evidence proving that they are wrong, they usually try to change the subject or come up with excuses instead of acknowledging their error. For example, imagine someone driving in the wrong direction. You suggest using GPS to find the correct route. Instead of accepting the advice, they would rather take the wrong road 10 more times than use the GPS simply because someone else recommended it. That is a clear example of stubborn behavior. The second characteristic is that they perceive disagreement as a threat. Instead of viewing a different opinion as simply another perspective, they often feel personally attacked. When someone expresses a different viewpoint, they interpret it as an attempt to undermine their character or diminish their worth. The third characteristic is a severe lack of flexibility. Changing their plans or revising their opinions is extremely difficult for them. They usually prefer to remain in control of every situation. Whenever a disagreement arises, they instinctively become defensive rather than listening carefully to understand what the other person is saying. Their goal is not to understand, it is to win the argument. Sometimes they are even willing to hurt themselves in order to avoid admitting they were wrong. I'm sure you've seen people like this. In behavioral science, this pattern is known as self-defeating behavior, driven by the need to preserve one's position. In other words, a person remains loyal to their own stance, even when doing so causes personal loss or harm. Imagine an employee working on an important project. The manager criticizes them. gives them instructions, or disagrees with them. Instead of focusing on the success of the project, which would also benefit the employee, they become determined to oppose the manager. They may even sabotage a project that serves their own interests simply because they don't want to follow the manager's instructions. Their primary objective becomes embarrassing the manager rather than achieving success. That is stubbornness. So I think the concept is now quite clear. The question that naturally arises, and one you may also be wondering, is this: why do people become stubborn? From a scientific perspective, ladies and gentlemen, stubbornness has several underlying causes. One of the most important is low self-esteem. Contrary to popular belief, many stubborn people actually feel deeply insecure inside. They mistakenly believe that admitting a mistake would mean admitting they are worthless or incapable. As a result, they resist acknowledging their errors. The second cause is the fear of humiliation. If you examine the childhood history of many stubborn individuals, you'll often find that they were repeatedly criticized or blamed when they were young. These individuals usually become determined never to back down. This is one of the major pathways through which stubbornness develops. This is especially important for those of you who are parents. Please be very careful with your children. Avoid constantly criticizing or blaming them. Excessive criticism can gradually make children more stubborn. The third major root of stubbornness appears in people who feel they are losing control over their environment. They become accustomed to responding with stubbornness whenever they feel powerless. At its core, this behavior is closely connected to a strong desire for control. They feel that by refusing to give in, they regain a sense of power. Part 2. Of course, these are not the only roots of stubbornness. For some people, stubbornness is closely tied to their personality. Research has shown that certain personality types are more likely to display stubborn behavior. For example, individuals with dominant or controlling personality traits, as well as those who are excessively perfectionistic, tend to exhibit stubbornness more frequently than others. Another contributing factor is what psychologists call cognitive biases. The reason is quite simple. The human brain naturally prefers information that confirms its existing beliefs, rather than information that challenges them. In psychology, this tendency is known as confirmation bias. As a result, sometimes all it takes is for someone to realize that another person disagrees with them, and they immediately become defensive and stubborn. One question that has attracted the attention of researchers is whether stubbornness has a genetic basis. I came across an interesting scientific article. Since it is rather lengthy, I won't read all of it, but I'd like to share a brief excerpt with you because I think you'll find it fascinating. The article states, based on twin studies and behavioral genetics research, approximately 30 to 50% of individual differences in traits such as persistence, emotional reactivity, and flexibility may have a genetic component. However, there is no single gene called the stubbornness gene. Instead, genes primarily influence temperament, emotional sensitivity, and personality characteristics, all of which may increase a person's likelihood of displaying stubborn behavior. Another important topic researchers have examined is the role of upbringing and environment. Let me refer to another study. According to this research, approximately 50 to 70% of behaviors associated with stubbornness are significantly influenced by environmental factors, parenting styles, and cultural influences. Think about how important this finding is. For instance, A child raised by extremely strict and authoritarian parents is generally more likely to develop stubborn behavior. Interestingly, the opposite extreme can also have negative consequences. Children raised with excessive permissiveness, where there are virtually no boundaries or guidance, may also develop stubborn tendencies. Humiliating forms of punishment are particularly harmful. Childhood is an incredibly sensitive period that plays a decisive role in shaping a person's future. Unfortunately, many parents never receive proper education on child development. Instead, they rely solely on personal experience or the mistaken belief that they naturally know everything about raising children. Sometimes, without realizing it, parents inflict deep and lasting damage on their children's personalities. One possible consequence is the development of stubbornness. Years later, that child grows up and becomes a husband, a wife, a mother, or a father. And the person who eventually shares life with them may end up suffering because of those unresolved personality traits. This is why these issues are so important. If you are a parent, please don't ignore your children's feelings, even the seemingly insignificant ones. Never dismiss or overlook their emotions. Especially during the first 7 years of life, childhood represents a golden and decisive period that can profoundly influence whether a person's future is filled with happiness or hardship. Another harmful parenting habit is constantly comparing children with one another. You've probably seen parents do this. They compare one child to a sibling or to another child. This can be extremely damaging and may encourage stubborn behavior. Likewise, when children are never given opportunities to make choices appropriate for their age, they often become more resistant and stubborn. One more influential factor is parental modeling. When one, or especially both, parents are stubborn themselves, they become behavioral role models for their children. Children naturally imitate what they observe at home. You may also find it interesting to know that, in some cases, stubbornness is actually considered a normal stage of development. Researchers have reported that children between the ages of 2 and 4 often display a certain degree of stubborn behavior. At this stage, experts generally advise parents not to overreact. Why? Because the child is in the process of discovering their independence. They are trying to establish a sense of autonomy and prove that they can make decisions on their own. As a result, some of their behaviors may resemble stubbornness. If parents respond appropriately during this period, these behaviors usually decrease gradually as the child matures. However, if parents constantly suppress or harshly punish the child, this temporary developmental stage may evolve into a lasting pattern of stubbornness that continues into adulthood. Later in life, people don't see the childhood experiences behind the behavior. They simply see an adult who is stubborn. And unfortunately, that stubbornness can have serious consequences. What are the consequences of stubbornness? The effects can be far-reaching and deeply damaging. First of all, stubbornness creates conflict in marriage and family life. It weakens relationships because communication becomes increasingly difficult. When one person constantly refuses to listen or acknowledge another perspective, misunderstandings accumulate and emotional distance grows. Stubborn people often struggle to maintain healthy relationships with others. Friends, relatives, colleagues, and even family members may eventually find it exhausting to deal with someone who is unwilling to compromise or admit mistakes. Stubbornness can also cause people to lose valuable career opportunities. Sometimes, an individual refuses to accept constructive criticism, ignores helpful advice, or rejects a better approach simply because they don't want to appear wrong. As a result, they may miss promotions, lose important projects, or damage their professional reputation. Another consequence is that stubbornness limits learning. A stubborn person is often reluctant to learn from others because learning requires openness, humility, and the willingness to accept that someone else may know something we do not. When this openness disappears, personal growth slows down. Over time, stubbornness may also contribute to psychological distress. A constant need to defend one's position places tremendous pressure on the mind. This can increase stress levels, create chronic anxiety, and leave the individual emotionally exhausted. In many cases, stubborn people make poor decisions simply because they refuse to reconsider their position. Unfortunately, some of these decisions have consequences that cannot easily be reversed. Another sad outcome is social isolation. Many stubborn individuals eventually find themselves alone, not because people dislike them as human beings, but because maintaining a relationship with someone who constantly argues, refuses to listen, or never admits mistakes becomes emotionally draining. People naturally distance themselves from such behavior. That is why paying attention to this issue is so important, especially when it comes to raising the next generation. The way we educate our children today shapes the adults they will become tomorrow. If we teach them respect, emotional security, healthy self-esteem, and the ability to admit mistakes without shame, we help them develop into flexible, resilient, and emotionally healthy adults. On the other hand, if we repeatedly humiliate them, ignore their feelings, compare them with others, or deny them opportunities to make age-appropriate choices, we may unintentionally lay the foundation for stubbornness later in life. This is why parenting is such a great responsibility. Every interaction with a child leaves an imprint on their developing personality. As parents and educators, we should strive to nurture confidence instead of fear, understanding instead of humiliation, and healthy independence instead of excessive control. By doing so, we not only improve the lives of our own children, but also contribute to building healthier families and healthier societies. I hope this discussion has been helpful and informative for you. Now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that stubborn people can truly change if they are willing to work on themselves? Or do you think stubbornness is simply an unchangeable part of someone's personality? If you've had personal experiences with stubborn people, or perhaps you've struggled with stubbornness yourself, I would genuinely appreciate hearing your perspective. Please share your experiences and opinions in the comments below. I'd also love to hear what you think about the ideas and scientific findings I presented in this video. If you have any comments, constructive criticism, additional insights, or even a different viewpoint, please don't hesitate to write them in the comments section. Your participation is extremely valuable. Meaningful discussions not only enrich this community, but also help all of us learn from one another's experiences. And before you leave, I'd like to make one small request. If you found this video useful, please click the like button. Your support helps YouTube's algorithm recommend this video to more people who may benefit from its content. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss future videos on psychology, personal development, family relationships, and other educational topics. Thank you very much for watching and for spending your valuable time with me. I sincerely appreciate your support. Until next time, stay healthy, stay thoughtful, and take good care of yourselves. With my deepest respect, Amir Mehrdad Khosravi.